Don't know me, I am the event coordinator here at Doug. So I help run our local and regional meetup program. So just a little bit of an introduction as to who Doug is. Doug is a free community for users, implementers, and resellers of Microsoft business applications. We mainly support Microsoft Dynamics 365, GP, and Power Platform, and we hope to help people grow professionally and personally within the dynamic space. Oh, it always does this. All right. So our rules of engagement are that we essentially ask that these meetups be held as solely educational sources. So please no sales pitches. We want everybody to get some educational content out of these meetups. And Doug or Dynamics user group, we have multiple different programs. So we have online forums where you can ask open discussion questions. We have webinars, local meetups. We have a team up program. We have conferences and a YouTube channel where you can find meetups like this. And we post all of our virtual meetups on the YouTube channel. So really great content on YouTube as well. We have some 2025 regional Doug meetups coming up soon. These are a little bit larger in scope than our local meetups, so they are full days of content, and we have sponsors, we provide lunch, breakfast, coffee, all of the things, and we usually have multiple different tracks and rooms of educational sessions. So we have one coming up next week in Tampa, Florida. It will be very nice to go to the Sunshine State, so I'm personally very excited about that. We have a Northeast regional going to be in Boston on February 27th. We're coming to Canada in June, West Africa on July 19th, East Africa on July 24th and the 25th, which will be in Kenya. We're going to Colorado in August, Ohio, August 26th to the 27th, and Texas on September 17th. So full booked year. We're very excited about it. And we also have our largest conference of the year, which is our 2025 DynamicsCon from May 13th to the 16th. This will be in Chicago, Illinois. And we are super excited. It will be a full week of content. And we'll have multiple different sessions throughout the day. It will be a very big party with everybody in the community. So excited and hope that you can make it. And Savannah, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you.
Thank you. Yep. So thanks everyone for joining. And if you're watching this afterwards, thank you for watching. How this typically goes is I encourage interaction. I'm sure Jay will say the same. If you have a question, feel free to come off mute, turn your camera on if you wish, or not to. That is fine. And if you have any questions, maybe pop up afterwards. I also encourage reaching out, LinkedIn or whatever, the meetup page. It's all great stuff. But this is our first installment of the Power BI extravaganza for January. So throughout the month, we'll be having a lot of exciting sessions if you'd like to return. But that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, and he can get started with talking about visual calculations.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Savannah. Thank you, Madison. Thanks for the intros and thanks for having me. And I just started sharing my screen, so if you, Savannah, can maybe confirm you can see that would be great. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's awesome to see you here. And if you're watching the recording, thanks for watching. If you're joining live, thanks for joining. And I'm excited to be talking to you about a little feature in Power BI that I've been working on for like 4 years and a bit of my life, which seems like a long time for one feature. So I hope you do like the feature after we're done here, because otherwise I feel like I've wasted my time, at least not talking to you, but designing the feature. So here we are. Today is about DAX, the programming language that everybody loves to hate. And you might know me, you might know my name by now or not, if you're in the Power BI space a little bit. I'm Jeroen. I go by Jay for everybody that doesn't speak any Dutch. which I assume is everybody watching this right now or later. I'm a principal product manager on the Power BI team at Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft for going on 17 years now. Always been active in the BI space. And I currently own this programming language in Power BI that is called DAX, the programming language that everybody loves to hate. If you want to reach out to me, here's my email address. I'm also active on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Blue Sky, and Twitter is my ex social media, so I'm no longer on that one. But if you want to ever reach out, here's where to find me. And as I said, today we're going to talk about DAX. Please use the chat. If you have any questions, I'll monitor it as we go. There will also be a specific moment in the slide deck that I'll pause for questions anyway. But if you have questions as they come up, or remarks or concerns, just use the chat, and we'll get to those as we go. So with that, let's just jump in. So as I mentioned, we were talking about DAX today, and this is the reality of how most of us write DAX today, right? DAX is this programming language in Power BI that you use to do any calculations like measured and calculated columns with. And this is how I write my DAX, right? You go and find it somewhere online, or you go find a blog somewhere, or you copy it from somewhere else, and then you paste it into your file, and maybe you cross your fingers, maybe you invoke some higher DD if that's your thing, and then you hope it just works. And it's really interesting to think about that problem. If Power BI wants to be this self-service analytics tool that is low bar to entry, very simple to get started, it's interesting to consider that the programming language you have to use to do any calculations like a sum or an average or whatever is considered very hard, right? And most of the people resort to this kind of behavior that we're seeing here on the slide to do that programming, right? Or they go read these books. So this one, for example, is a famous one, right? The Definitive Guide to DAX by Rousseau and Ferrari. You go read this. Maybe you take that training or another training. You can also read other books, of course. So this one, this one, which is like a Dutch product. So that's why I have to show it. So this is two Dutch MVPs that write this. So this is more the theoretical background, and this foundation. This is more the practical application. Maybe eventually you graduate to reading this guy, which is like huge. But if you think about this is a lot of paper. But didn't I just say that Power BI was supposed to be this simple tool that was low barrier to entry? And then to be successful using DAX, at least to some extent, maybe not this one, but to some extent, you have to read these books, maybe take some training, and you read them again, and you read them again, and you still don't get it? Isn't that wrong? Isn't that the wrong thing? Shouldn't it be easier? So that's really where we started like 5 years ago. It's like, shouldn't it be easier? If this is really the reality of how people use DAX and use Power BI, are we on the right track? And my answer is no, we are not. Because I think it should be easier, and it can be easier without getting rid of the power of Power BI and DAX, right? So for example, if you ever did something as simple as a running sum or a running total in Power BI, you'll very quickly discover it's pretty hard to do. And actually, if you start searching for it, you'll find a website that tells you 21 steps to doing a running total or a running sum in Power BI and DAX. 21. Now consider that for a second. We're not talking rocket science here. A running sum is just basic math, right? It's just addition. You take a number, you add another number, then you add another number, and then you add another number, you just keep going all the way till you're done. Anybody can do this with a basic understanding of math. You can do this piece of paper, Excel, drag and drop, whatever. It's very simple. And here's the leading self-service analysis tool in the world that claims to be simple, and it requires 21 steps. That is 20 steps too many, in my book. This should not require you to take training or to read books. Not saying you shouldn't read these books, but to do something as simple as a running sum, it should be easier. Right? So let's face it, the reality really is DAX, the programming language in Power BI, is very hard. And to be exact, what makes it very hard is something we call filter context. And filter context is what impacts any DAX expression when it gets executed. So if you look at the DAX measure, for example, sum of sales amount, that same expression, those characters, sum of sales amount, might mean completely different things depending on the context it gets executed in. So it might mean the total sales for all products in all years across all countries in the world, or it might mean the total sales for yellow products in Charlotte in last month, for example, right? It could mean any of those things. You don't know, and you can see that in the formula. That's because the context in which the formula gets executed, the filter context, is what determines the scope in which it's being executed, hence the result of the calculation. So that is not shown to you. It is opaque. You need to understand this to make sense of these calculations and predict the results. So, and then on top of that, typical business type calculations like a running sum that you would think is easy, or a customer thinks is easy, or a manager thinks is easy, are really hard to do. And that's because DAX really doesn't understand what came before. So when DAX is being executed, there's no knowledge of understanding what just happened before, which is a core problem in this running sum scenario. We, of course, in DAX, in Power BI, we offer quick measures. If you ever use quick measures, you know it can generate that running sum or that moving average for you. But I would question how useful that is, because the DAX it outputs is still very complicated. And how can you validate that that is doing the right thing if you don't understand the DAX that we output, right? It's a similar thing as if you use AI or ChatGPT or Copilot to generate DAX. That's great to some extent as a starting point, but you should still be able to understand the DAX and validate it and change it to make sure and be sure that it's actually what you needed, right? If the thing that the machine just outputted is some DAX that you don't understand, honestly, you should question whether or not that is the right tool for you to use, right? Because you are unable to validate it, so there's zero guarantee it's the right result. So quick measures, same problem. So then we started thinking, what if we could make this whole thing easier? What if we could do away with the complexity of DAX and make DAX easier to use? And therefore lowering the bar of entry into Power BI, lowering the bar to doing calculations, making it easier to do this running sum and other types of calculations we'll see in just a second. What if we could do all that without reducing the power, right? Without reducing the power of what DAX is and what DAX can be as you need it. And that's essentially what we're talking about today, and what we came up with in a period of 4 years is what we call visual calculations. So what makes DAX so hard? It's the filter context. That's the core problem. The core problem is that any calculation you do in DAX is executed within the context that sits within the model. Again, we don't show you that context. We don't visualize that context. It's impossible to see. What if, instead of requiring you to do calculations inside of that context that is opaque to you, what if we allowed you to do a calculation inside of a visual? Because in a visual, let's say a line chart, you see something that's very simple. You see an x-axis, you see a y-axis, you see a line, maybe multiple lines if you have a legend. You can kind of understand how that thing is being built, and we can show you how that thing is being built in a table format. And if we do that, we could say, hey, within this table that consists of columns and rows with some numbers in there, let's just do a calculation in here. Wouldn't that be easier? It would look a lot like Excel spreadsheets that most people are very used to. You know, some cells, some rows, some columns, and some numbers. Would that be great? Well, that's essentially what visual calcs are. So we allow you to make this calculation inside of this visual. And by allowing you to do that calculation on that visual, we got rid of this filter context, because when the visual is on your screen, the filter context has already been determined and has already been applied. So what you're seeing on the screen, the table and the visual, are the result of that filter context being applied to the data. So after that filter context has been applied, you get the opportunity to then do a calculation within the data you're looking at. So that means you don't have to worry about the filter context anymore, which basically does away with most, if not all, of the complexity of DAX. And then we could even allow you to do point and click, less typing, easier gestures like Excel. So that's what visual calculations are, or visual calcs. That's what they are. They are DAX calculations on a visual. It's not a new programming language. you're gonna use DAX. Whatever you already know about DAX, you're gonna be using inside of those calculations. You can refer to anything that's on the visual, and including any other visual calc. So you can build a calculation on top of a calculation. They're executed inside of the visual because we want to make it easier. That also means you cannot refer back into the model. So the model, the data model, we have lots of tables in there, but you're not showing all the columns and all the tables in this one visual. You may be showing a couple fields from multiple tables in this visual. You cannot refer back out into the model, and that might feel like a limitation, but it's actually on purpose. Because think about it, if we allowed you to step outside of the house of the little visual, back out into the wild world, the white world, you would have to worry about what makes DAX hard again. You would have to worry about that filter context again. It sneaks back in, and you get the complexity again as a result. So we want to hide that complexity for you and make it easier. So that's why we said, no, you cannot refer back out to the visual, to the model. If you want something on the visual, put it on the visual, and then you can refer to that in your calculation. But then on top of that, since we now have a DAX construct inside of a visual where we know axes like a Y and an X axis, we can do stuff with those axes. So we can actually do some stuff that measures can't, because measures in DAX don't know anything about the visual they're being executed in. To a measure, when they are being executed, they have no idea if they're being executed just to make a table or a matrix or a map or a fancy whatever chart. They don't care, they're not aware, so they cannot interact with those dimensions of that visual anyway. So if you already are familiar of like what happens with DAX and Power BI, you might go like, but wait, we already had measures, we already had calculated columns. Are you now taking away something from us, or are you adding a new tool in your toolbox? And we're basically adding a new tool in the toolbox. So the way I like to think about this is visual calculations are the love child of measures and calculated columns. Because measures are great. They are dynamic. They are calculated on the fly. They don't bloat your model. It makes it very easy to build very complicated measures and very powerful measures. They have a big downside. They are subject to filter context, and that makes them very hard to use. Calculated columns, on the other hand, do bloat your model because they're pre-calculated, so they are stored inside of the model. So they're not great to use every single time. They're very static, but they're very easy to define because they work inside of a table. You can look at the table and go like, yeah, I understand how this calculation is being done. So visual calculations in a nutshell is the best of both things, right? So you get the simplicity of working in a table and the dynamic aspect of a measure, right? Without the pre-calculation. So both of those things together are then visual calculations. And then on top of that, like a child that always does something more than their parents did, they can do something more than what measures and calculated columns can do, because we're now in a visual structure. So we'll see that in just a second. So I like to think about the problem of DAX as a swimming pool. And this might be a bit of a weird analogy, but bear with me. So measures, if you today are using, let's forget about visual calculations for a second. If you step into DAX, there's only a deep end to the pool. You better take some training, read some of the books, talk to the experts, or you will sink. And you better learn to swim, otherwise you won't succeed. And with visual calcs, we're essentially not saying don't ever go into the deep end. We're adding a kiddie pool to the pool, right? And basically saying, hey, here's an area called visual calcs that is probably very comfortable to you, especially if you come from Excel. It's easy to use. You won't drown. The water will come up to your ankles or to your knees or maybe to your middle if you wade in a little bit further. But you don't necessarily have to learn to swim from day one, right? So you can get started, find your bearings, get used to this language called DAX and this whole construct of what Power BI is. And then once you're ready, if you're ready, you can go into the deep end and learn how to swim and grow up to use measures. You don't have to. If you want to stay in the kiddie pool, that's all great. We don't judge. You can go into the deep end. That's fine. You don't have to. And it's like a scale. It's not one or the other. You can choose where you want to be, right? So sometimes you might be using visual calcs, and for some things you might use a measure. But right now, the only thing we offer is the measure where you have to take the training, where you have to read the books, where the chances to succeed are slim, especially if you're new. We see so many people writing a very simple measure, failing with that because they try to do it from an Excel background and they don't understand yet how measures work. They fail and they never come back. We see that happening in our product, and that's just lost opportunity for everybody involved. And we want to make that easier. And Visual Calc is this entry level into this programming language that allows you to do that. So what are they? Well, they're easy and flexible. You can have point and click if you want, and I will not be able to show a lot of that today, but I will show a little bit of pieces, but more is coming. And you're just working within what you can see. And then on top of that, we allow you to do high-level calculations, very simple, very easily, and you can refer to the visual structure. Now, here's the most important slide. The one slide I want you to remember from all of this is coming up. And that is the mental model of visual calculations, which is what makes it work. So think about any chart you've ever created in your life in Power BI. It might be a map, might be a line chart, a bar chart, maybe a dreaded pie chart. Anything you made, just think about that. Do you think you can represent that same chart in a matrix with columns and rows? The answer is yes, you can. You can always represent that same chart in a matrix, in a tabular structure. And that's the core idea here. So we take your chart, let's say a bar chart, or a column chart, let's say a column chart, and that column chart shows sales and cost over 3 years, right? So we have 3 groups of 2 bars each, right? 1 series for sales, 1 series for cost, and then it's divided in 3 groups for 1 for each year. Makes sense? We can represent that column chart as a matrix structure by saying, well, the years are on the rows, so we get 3 rows, 1 for each year, and then we have a column for each of the numbers. So 1 column for the sales amount and 1 column for the cost. So in essence, all that Power BI needs to build this 1 column chart to your screen, we need 3 rows and 3 columns, right? And as you can see that here on the screen, it's actually showing you that in a little mock-up here, is if you go over here, you'll see that there's 2 series and there's, the lighter and the darker colored series, and there's 3 groups, right? And this might have multi-million rows of data beneath it. There might be individual sales records in here. You might be, I don't know, a huge retailer. You might have petabytes of data that all like millions of sales records over the holidays. I don't care. We don't care because we're not in the business of showing you millions of individual data points, right? Most people can only handle up to 9 data points at a time. So we're always in the business of summarizing data to a chart. So this is essentially what we're showing you. We're showing the summarized version of that chart, right? So we're showing you that chart that you just created. And then we're also showing you the table, right? So again, here's 3 groups, 1 for each year, 3 rows, and then for each of the series, so 2 series, the sales amount and the cost, 1 column, right? So this matrix here at the bottom is the matrix representation of that visual. You can do the math, it is exactly the same, and it should always be exactly the same. And then a visual calculation is nothing more than adding a column onto this visual matrix, and therefore onto the visual. And you'll do that using a formula bar that's shown in the middle. Cool. So that's what you need to remember. A visual can always be represented as a matrix, and the visual calculation is a column on that matrix. Cool. So with that, let's get to the live demo so we can actually see how this works. I need to switch to my demo here. Okay, cool. So we're looking at Power BI Desktop. There's no trickery here. This is the live version of the product. It's not a special version that I'm running here. I'm just going to create a very simple recreation of the visual that we just been looking at in the slides. So I'm going to create a chart that shows me that cost and that sales amount by each year, right? So we see literally the column chart that I just showed you on the slide. Great. So now I can go and define calculations onto this chart. So I can go in, and once I have this chart selected, you'll see a button show up here that is called New Visual Calculation, that one. You can see that, and if you click that, you will see you enter into what we call Visual Calc's edit mode. So if I click this, you'll now see, let me just get rid of some of this, so it's a little bit bigger. You can now see something that's very similar to the slide I just showed you, right? We see the visual that we activated our calculation mode on. We see the visual representation, the visual matrix, as we like to call it, of the same data, right? We see that here at the bottom. We see a formula bar, and we see a new placeholder calculation column being added, right? You can go and check it. You'll see that these are exactly the same, right? So these numbers add up across the years. These rows, these numbers that you see here are exactly the same as we show you in the chart. Very, very simple. Cool. So now let's do some calculations with this data, right? Again, there might be millions of data points under here, might come from multiple tables. In fact, it came from 2 tables. I don't care, right? There's only 1 table to work with. There's aggregated data. It's very simple to understand, right? So in here, I'm going to do some calculations. And I'm going to start with something that I know should have been a measure, but just as a simple starting point. So I'm going to calculate something called, let me zoom in so we can easily see it. So I'm going to calculate something that's called profit. And I'm going to use this to say, okay, profit is the total sales minus the cost, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm essentially building a column onto this table as if this was just the only table that existed, as if I was just working in a calculator column, right? And I'm not referring to the table, I'm just referring to exactly what I see here on the screen. So if I do this, we'll see we have a profit calculation. In fact, if I go and rename, let's say, the total sales to Savannah's total sales, you'll see that it will still work. The title will change. And then if you go into the expression over here, you'll see that it says, okay, this is now Savannah's total sales, right? So it's only aware of what exactly is on your screen. It's very, very simple to understand. You can very easily create this. Okay, so now we have a profit. Great. Let's do something more intelligent. Let's compare the profit for each year versus the profit of the year before, right? So for 2020, I want to calculate that difference between this number and this number. And for 2019, I want to calculate the difference between this number and that number. Okay? How would I do that? Well, in normal DAX, it's pretty hard, but in this in visual calculations mode, it's relatively easy. So you can almost just think about and think about it out loud to do this. So let's say, okay, I want to calculate the difference in the profit. So first I need the profit for each cell. So that's just a reference to profit. And then I need a way to get the previous profit, right? I need the profit from the previous year. Any guesses to the function I would be using to get the previous profit? Maybe previous? Would it be that simple? Could I just write previous? Well, yeah, you could, right? I could say, hey, give me the profit minus the previous profit. This is almost like English. It is as simple as you might have thought and hoped it would be, right? And in regular DAX, it's not as simple as this. Not at all. So would this work? Yes, of course this works. Who made this? Well, I did. So that's why I know this works, right? So as you can see now, you see a comparison for this number is then the difference between this number and that number. This is the difference between that and that, right? Very, very simple stuff. Let's do something more intelligent. We also have an FX button here in case you want to explore what we can do here. There's all kinds of useful calculations that you can easily just use as a template. You don't have to use these, but just as you get started, you can use those. So versus previous, I've already shown you, but let's do a running sum, right? So running sum, of course, a very simple, common calculation that people want to do, but very hard to do in regular DAX. So I can click this and we can load the template. But before I do that, what would be the function you think for running sum? Right? How would I define a running sum in Power BI? Would it be so simple as just literally calling it what it is? A running sum. That would be great, right? Well, here you go. It's just a function called running sum. It doesn't get any simpler than this. And I wanted to do a running sum of profit, right? So I'm basing, I already did that, but I'm just showing you that again. I'm basing this running sum on the visual calculation that I had before, which is called profit. Will this work? Well, yeah, of course it works, right? So now we have a running sum of profit across all the rows, and you can do the math and you can see it works. Okay, let's do one more. How about a moving average, right? If you wanted to do a moving average, what would be the function you would use for a moving average? Well, you should know by now. You should know how my brain works. I named these functions. I'm guessing you know that the name of the function for moving average is going to be moving average, right? Yes, it is. Okay, great. So the function name is called moving average. I'm just going to give it the profit to do the moving average over. And then I need to specify the window size. And the window size means how many rows of this table that I'm looking at here, which is, pretty short with 3 rows. How many of those would I want to take to calculate a average over? If I do a window size of 1, the average of 1 number is of course the same numbers, so that's not going to be very useful. So I would recommend maybe a window size of 2 here, because then the average of 2018 would be 2018, the average of 2019 would be the average of 2018 and 2019, for 2020 would be 2019 and 2020, right? So with that, I can just go and say, hey, the window size is 2. And now I have a moving average that I just easily calculated using very simple DAX. Okay, great. So we did this. But, okay, so we have all these great calculations, but my visual is kind of screwed up, right? And I'm not a big visualizations guy, but even I can tell that this visual is not like good, right? So what I can do now is, let's say I only wanted to show the versus previous profit, and I only wanted to work with the moving average and the running sum. I am not interested in the rest, right? I'm not interested in the sales and the cost and the profit themselves. I'm only interested in the things that I calculated later. So can I just decide what I want to show on the visual? I can. If you go over here to the right, you'll see there's a little, whoops, that is not the button click I wanted. Okay, so if you go over here, you'll see in this bar in the visualizations pane, you'll see a familiar icon maybe from Power BI in the model view that I can decide to hide stuff from the visual. So I can just hide things here, and I can, move things around. So let me just move the running sum to the tooltips and the moving average as well. And if we go back here to the visual matrix, you'll see the visual matrix hasn't changed. Why is that? Well, because a visual calc can work with what's on the visual matrix. It cannot reach back out into the model, so we kept everything on the visual matrix, because if you delete stuff from the visual matrix, the whole thing would break, because profit is dependent on cost and Savannah's total sales. So if you delete those, profit wouldn't work, and as a result, the rest of the calculations wouldn't work because they're dependent on profit. So instead, we hide them, and then we change the visual. So now, if we go back out into the report, you'll see the visual here that shows a versus previous of profit, and it shows the running sum and the moving average in the tooltip. And you did this using very simple DAX in just 4 or 5 DAX statements that everybody could have written. That just was impossible or very hard to do before. And this is the power of visual calculations. It is so simple that anybody can just do this. And I hope by now you understand that this is the kiddie pool towards DAX. Cool. So with that, let's get back to the slides. So you might be sitting here and going like, wow, my mind is blown. If you are so inclined to do that now or after watching this video, after the session concludes, and want to share something on social media about this, please use these hashtags. It would be great. You would make my day. Don't feel like that is, of course, a requirement, but it would be great if you share the excitement about visual calculations. That would be awesome. So just to summarize what we talked about, what I showed you, visual calculations are DAX calculations in scope of a visual. So it's not a new language, but as part of that, we get new functions and new concepts, right? So most DAX will work. It is just DAX. So if you already have a calculator column that's a switch true statement to define to divide your sales orders into small, medium, and large, you can literally copy paste this thing into a visual calc, and it will just work. And you got rid of all the bloat of this calculator column. You can do basic arithmetic, what I've shown you, and there's new visual calculations functions, of which I've shown you a couple already. So just to hammer home the point, why is this easier? Well, here, let's implement a running sum calculation that sums sales amount over year. In the middle of the slide is the current DAX, which includes a calculator, a sum, a filter, all selected, is on or after a max. It is not the most complicated DAX you will ever see in your life, but arguably it's not the simplest, right? I would think that a beginner user or a new user would be hard pressed to just write this without looking anywhere else, right? You can find them, of course, here. You can find them everywhere, but without looking anywhere else, you will probably not come up with this. But I would argue that if you discover visual calcs, that you writing just running sum of sales amount would be something you would maybe come up with, right? At least the chances are higher you would discover that on your own. Let's do something more difficult. Given a list of states and a number of restaurants per state, for each state calculate the difference in the number of restaurants in that state versus the one above. On the left is the regular DAX you would have to write, which includes a temporary table with summarize, a selected value, and then a top and one trick that I honestly didn't come up with. I had to get help for that one. And then a sum X. Wow, very complicated stuff just to calculate the difference between two rows. And on the right, the top right, we have the window function version of this, which is something we introduced in 2022 in December, which makes this easier. It's still a calculate, but then an offset of -1, which is a function that allows you to do movement, relative movement. And then on the bottom right, we have the visual calcs equivalent of this, which I've already shown you, which is literally just thing minus previous of thing to calculate the difference, right? So as you can see, if you're not convinced by now, it is just DAX, and it's way easier. There's no arguing that this is easier, right? So what are the new functions? Well, there's a couple of new functions that we're introducing. Some of them you've already seen before, and I'll just go over them very quickly. They're divided in levels. So the low-level functions are the most flexible functions, but they're also the little bit more complex than the medium and high-level functions. So the further you go up the stack, the easier it gets to use, but you lose some of the flexibility. So the low-level functions are the window functions, and those window functions are, as I said, introduced in December 2022. You can use them anywhere. So when we introduced those, and if you go back and look at the blog from that month actually that I wrote, you'll see that in that blog I tried to allude a little bit, to point a little bit towards the visual calculations that we were building, but we were not ready to talk about it yet. So essentially I was showing you the Lego bricks that I was using to build this house with. But I wasn't allowed to talk about it yet. So I showed you the bits and pieces, and if you read between the lines now in retrospect, you go like, oh, this is what this guy was talking about. So these window functions are the foundation on the visual calculations. So they are available in measures, visual calculations, calculator columns, anywhere where you can use DAX. I won't go into details of these, but these allow you to do relative, absolute movement across a data set. Right, so you can either move rows up or down, columns up or down. You can move to the top, to the bottom of something. You can define little slices, like a moving window, right? And you can do all kinds of stuff. They're supported by order by, partition by, and match by functions. This is relatively complicated, but if you wanted to just use window type calculations in measures, this is what you would be using. Now, on top of that, we have easier to use functions, and some of them I've already shown you. So we have movement functions. They allow you to move up or to the left. Previous is moving upwards in the rows or to the left in the columns. Next is moving down or to the right. First is moving to the beginning of a row, of all the rows or all the columns, and last moves to the bottom of all the rows and all the columns. And those are just shortcut to those window functions. So previous and next are shortcuts to offset. First and last are shortcuts, easier to use versions of index. We have is at level, which allows you to inspect on which subtotal level you are. So if you feel like, hey, the totals and matrices in Power BI are not correct, I want to return something else. I don't want this to just be the evaluation of whatever was there in DAX, but I want this to be the actual visual total or an average or a max. You can do that with is at level and an if statement. You have expand and expand all, collapse and collapse all. They allow you to operate over hierarchies. So if you wanted to do an average of children, you use an expand. If you wanted to do a percentage of parent or percentage of total, you do a collapse. So collapse moves up in the hierarchy, expand moves down in the hierarchy. And then we also have an easier way to defining slices. And then we have two high-level functions, both of which I already showed you, running sum and moving average. Right, very, very simple stuff. So a couple concepts. that I want you to remember that I already talked about, visual matrix is the table representation of the visual on which you define your visual calculations. Axis is something that I've been using in my demo, and it's actually the secret sauce of what makes visual calculations work, but we haven't talked about it yet. So we'll talk about that. But it basically defines how the calculation moves over this visual matrix. By default, it will move downwards across the rows from top to bottom, but you can always also make it move left to right. You can also make it do other patterns of movement. And then reset allows you to define while the calculation is moving across those in that direction across the axes, does it ever restart calculation, right? We'll see that in just a second. Direction is basically the combination of those things. And then hidden is something that I've already used. That is the ability to allow you to hide calculations and fields from the visual, while still keeping them in the visual matrix. So axis is the concept that allows you to define how a calculation runs over the visual matrix. So by default, it's set to rows. And you will see these icons in our product, actually. So you'll see these same little icons here in the product. So if you forgot what rows and columns are, what it means, you will see these little arrows. So hopefully they will be helpful. By default, it's set to rows. That's why I didn't use it yet or didn't show you yet. I actually used it all the time. Rows means I'm going across the rows, top to bottom. Columns means I'm going across the columns left to right. Columns rows means I'm going to snake in like a Z-like pattern across the visual matrix, and rows columns means I'm going to snake in an N-like pattern across the visual matrix. Now, these last two you probably never used. We added them just because we could. They're useful only in a very limited scenario, but they're there just in case you need them. Okay? So, just to help you understand what this is, here's an example. We do a first of sales amount on rows, right? So look at the colors. You'll see that the dashed lines of each color map to the solid line of each color, right? So you'll see within each column, so years are now, the fiscal years are on columns. We are looking to find the sales amount that is in the first row, right? So you'll see that this red dashed box over here, finds the sales amount over here. The green ones find the sales amount over here. The blue ones find the sales amount over here. It's just the first row within each column that we retrieve the value for, right? That's also literally what it says. First sales amount on rows. Okay, great. Found that. Let's do a 90-degree turn. Let's do first sales amount on columns. Now we're not looking within each column. We're looking across the whole row, right? So we're now saying, okay, let's find the sales amount for the first column, which is the first year in this case, right? So the previous one was the first category, and here it's the first year. So now each dash line finds the same value every single time because it looks at the first column, right? So that's what this basically means. Across the column, find the first sales amount, right? So same colors match up to the other one. Great. Now this is for the brain hurting part. Let's do the other ones really quick. Let's do rows columns. So previous of sales amount on rows columns means for each cell retrieve the previous sales amount from the row above it or from the column to the left of it. So let's look at the colors again. This cell is empty. Why? There's no row above me, so I cannot get the previous value. There's no column to the left of me, so I cannot really do anything. So there's no previous value here. This one, well, that gets the value from the previous row. This one gets the value from the previous row. This one gets the value from the previous row. Simple. This one is not empty. If I would have written previous sales amount on rows, this would have been empty because there's no row above me. But since I wrote rows and columns, I'm allowed to take the last value of the previous column. So that's why this value is not empty. So you can see now how it snakes in an N pattern down the rows and then across the columns over the visual matrix. Last one, I promise. Previous sales amount columns rows, 90-degree turn. So now we snake in a Z pattern, right? Again, this first cell is empty. Why? There's no column to the left of me. There's no row above me. There's nothing for me to get. This one is not empty. Why? There's a column to the left of me. So get me that value. This one not empty. Column to the left of me. This one is not empty. There's no column to the left of me. But because I wrote columns rows, I'm allowed to get the value from the previous row. So that's then this one. And this yellow one, again, finds the value from the column to the left of me. Great. So this is the most complicated part you ever get into visual calculations. Again, columns, rows, columns, you probably not use very often, but you might be using them in the future. Then lastly, reset. Reset is really cool because it allows you to decide if a calculation restarts. So let's imagine you're doing a running sum of sales and quarters. If you just wrote running sum of sales, then you will see that the running sum will keep summing all the way to the bottom. Even if the year changes, right? We just entered a new year. You would probably want your running sum to restart from 0 for that new year. That is probably what you and your customer, your manager, your client wants. By default, we don't do that. We just keep summing because we don't know exactly what you meant. But with reset, you can say, okay, I'm just going to write running sum sales reset on year. That basically means whenever year changes value, this thing should start over from 0. So forget everything you knew, just start over. So if you write running sum sales, comma, year, you're basically saying, give me the running sum of sales, and then restarting the same calculation for every single year, every time the year changes value. And that will work for anything. It will work for whatever happens to be there, right? It could be that you refer to year. You could even refer to a field by just saying the highest field on this axis, whatever it happens to be, if it's color or category or name or gender or year or quarter or country, I don't care. Just whenever that value changes, I want your calculation to restart. So you get a moving average within the year, moving average within the quarter, a running sum within the quarter, within the year, within the country, within the product group, right? It doesn't matter. You can just express that very, very simply using reset. And then, and this coming soon on the previous slide, that's actually not true. I should be deleting that because it's already here. So then when you combine all of these, you'll get columns, rows, you get those snaking movements, and then while it's moving across the visual matrix, you can decide to restart the calculation at any point, right? And that's what these little vertical bars or horizontal bars kind of indicate over here, that it's changing values, it's restarting as it moves across. Last concept is hidden. I've already shown you that, so I'm not going to go into more detail on that one. It's just basically the ability to hide stuff on the visual matrix from the visual that is on the visual matrix. So with that, I am going to move to this last slide, and this is something that I have to show because it's one of my favorite memes about visual calculations. With that, I want to thank you for being here, and I'll happily take any questions. And I encourage you to try this feature out. It is still in preview. Please provide feedback on aka.ms/visual-calculations-feedback. We need your feedback to build this into the visual, the solution that you need. And with your help, we can make this into the actual feature that will make your life easier. So please try it out. Please get started. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself.
All right. I don't see anyone typing in the chat, nor is anyone unmuting themselves. So that's okay. If anyone does have any questions, feel free.
There's one hand raised now.
Awesome. Okay.
Hi, my name is
Hey.
Kashana. I was actually given this link like a couple hours ago from my mentor. I'm just getting started in Power BI. I'm working on like creating my first report for my portfolio, and I have to do a presentation for the company that I am a trainee with, TechFluent.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of came at the right time because I literally have been like fingertips deep in DAX and driving myself crazy trying to figure it out. And I was curious. I already have measures and some visuals that I've applied them to. Can I use these in addition to that?
Yes, you can.
Okay, because like the next step is I was doing like, same period last year, but I wanted to do a forecast.
Yep. So first of all, welcome, right? Welcome to the world of Power BI, and I'm glad you found us. And I think you're the perfect candidate or the perfect user for what I have in mind when we started working on visual calculations, right? To just that user that is onboarding, is like, what is this DAX language? What's going on? Why is this so complicated? You're the person I have in mind, not you personally, but your persona is what I have in mind when I work on this feature. So I'm glad you're here. So to answer your question, yes, you can absolutely, you already have your measures. You can absolutely use those on the visual, right? And then do a calculation on top of those with visual calculations. If you are unable to write what you want in a measure, for example, you're struggling with maybe writing the getting the value from the previous year, right? Like you just mentioned, I would encourage you to just use a visual calculation for now. Just make it easier on yourself. Just write that visual calculation. It will be very simple. And you can always convert it back into a measure once you find your footing with DAX a little bit, once you maybe read one of these books or went online and found the solution. There is actual functions that allow you to do this. It's same period last year. It involves a calculate. I can write the DAX very simply, but that's because I have years of experience. But just getting started, that would just save you a lot of time. Keep in mind,
That's what I
though,
thought.
that's keep in mind though that those calculations, those visual calculations, are tied to the visual. So if you need that same calculation on multiple visuals in your dashboard or report, you would have to redo that calculation, right? And that's exactly where the difference between visual calculations and measures exist, because measures are reusable across visuals, right? You define them once, you can put them on any visual, right? They will just work. As long as the measure works, they will do something. If it's doing the right thing, that's the next question, but they will do something. So if you wanted to reuse this calculation across visuals, you would, if you did it in a visual calculation, you would have to copy paste that visual calculation everywhere, which is arguably not the best story, right? And we're planning to introduce a better reuse story in the future, but right now this is what it is. You can write the same visual calculation always in a measure. You can always do it, but it will be harder as I've demonstrated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean,
Okay.
it's perfect for what I am doing. I don't necessarily like need the measure.
Mhm.
I just need to calculate this real quick because it's what I desire to convey in this report. It's something I want to have in there.
Yep.
But down the line, like being a newbie, this is perfect for me. I'll be able to like kind of see how it work. And then, like you said, once I have that book that you were talking about, it's on my list of things to read. But for the grand scheme of things, the visual calculation is kind of coming in with a cape for me at this point.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you feel that way. And again, as I've been trying to say, visual calculations are not the end station, right? We see it as a way for you to get started, get used to it, find your bearings, get slowly introduced to this language and this concept of like calculations. And then once you're ready, once you need them, graduate into the bigger world of measures, where arguably, if you want to reuse stuff, you want to have full flexibility, that's where you need to be. But, you wouldn't ask a toddler to assemble a rocket, right? You wouldn't do that, right? You would probably start them off with training wheels on a little bike, and then eventually they will grow up in rocket science. The DAX in measures is rocket science. The visual calcs is the bike with training wheels.
Perfect.
So that,
Thank you so much.
yep. No worries. And if you have any questions in the future, you have my contact details now. I'll just also leave them in the chat here. But if you ever want to reach out, have any problems, feel free to reach out, or of course use your user group and get some help there, or use our forums. I'm also active there. But if you wanted to reach out directly, this is where you can find me. Savannah, go for it.
Yeah, so I could have just missed this, but outside of usability, what are the other like limitations for visual calculations as they are now?
There's a bunch. They're not supported in Power BI Embedded. They're not supported on all visual types yet. They're not supported on custom visuals yet. So there's a bunch of things that are limitations. So once you enter the Visual Calcs edit mode, you actually see them. Like if you go in here, where's my mouse? If you go in the Visual Calcs edit mode, you'll notice that if you go look over here, you'll see that some of these visuals are grayed out, right? So I cannot use all of these visuals right now. So there's no support for AI visuals. There's no support for script visuals yet. So this is just a matter of time. You cannot do custom visuals, as I said. Also, performance analyzer is not available yet. They don't work with that yet. So it's just basically like that kind of stuff. So it's mostly interactions with other features that are in the Power BI product that we simply haven't built yet. And the link you just posted literally lists all of those limitations. So if you wanted to see the limitations, you could go in there. But honestly, that's just a matter of time. We're working very hard on finishing this feature. We're working on making it even easier to use, adding more functions, and making point and click work, right? I promised point and click in the slides, but you haven't really seen me clicking very much, although some of that is already in the product, but it's pretty brittle. We'll get there. But the idea is that essentially this visual matrix should turn into some kind of spreadsheet where you can just interact with these cells in here and learn how these calculations work. And you don't have to do so much typing. You could just say, oh, I wanted to do the cost or the profit plus, the sales amount minus the cost. Just click it, type minus, click it, press enter, you're done. Your calculation is done and you don't have to type at all. That kind of stuff is something that we're working on, which is coming in very soon. But those are just cherries on top. The basics stuff already works.
Awesome. Yes, I'm a big fan of visual calculations.
I love it. I love it. I'm glad at least somebody likes it. No, just joking. Lots of people like it. Lots of people have discovered this. It's very popular. But again, it's not the end station, right? Like it's a beginner's tool once you're onboarding, and then, please don't see them as the end station for yourself, right? Like, yes, it can be the end station. It can be where you are most comfortable and you don't want to grow and learn and graduate into this more complicated world of measures. That's great. You're happy. You're welcome to stay here. But we really see it as this gradual road towards this more complicated, more powerful, arguably, world of measures.
As someone who has been in the Power BI world for about 5 years now, I learned this all backwards. Like, we didn't have visual calculations when I first started. So, seeing its inception and push out into the world, it's been really awesome to play with it and be like, oh my God, this used to be like so long in DAX and I'd want to pull my hair out and I don't have that much hair. So figuring it out, and then seeing it be easier is so awesome.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm right there with you. I'm struggling with DAX every day, and it's just basically like, it's tough. And I've been in the Power BI world since how long I can remember, but it's still tough sometimes, right? The basic stuff I can easily do, but some of the things are very, very hard to do, and they still are harder. So I am also very, what's the word? Lazy. And I just want to solve this problem for myself, make my life easier. And, as I'm doing that, why not share it with others and solve the problem for them as well? So yeah, I'm glad there's excitement for it. I'm glad people like it. And if you're a beginner, you just discovered Power BI, you just discovered DAX, use visual calculations. And then once you're ready, grow up into the bigger world of DAX and measures, where all the power resides. Cool. Any other questions? People want to jump in?
It does not seem so. If there is any other questions, feel free to, post them on the YouTube video. I check those frequently. Post them on the meetup, or connect with us directly.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here and watching. And hope to see you soon. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.